touchdown. It's through 50. He's got the speed. Touchdown.
Welcome into another episode of Mac and Mose. Andy McNamara joined by the editor-in-chief of GoDucks.com, Rob Mosley. We are here to wrap up preseason training camp for the Oregon football team and also preview the Ducks season opener against Eastern Washington at Autzen Stadium. And I don't know about you, Rob. I am getting older, but this particular preseason camp just seemed to fly by. I mean, it really did. I know that the team doesn't do as many double days as they once did. Maybe the total number of times or practices and time spent out there in the heat. It just didn't seem like as much this year, and it went by really fast. And now it seems like years ago that there was a question mark about who the Oregon quarterback would be coming into this season.
Right.
Vernon Adams arrived in camp late, but after 2 full weeks of practice was named atop the depth chart by Mark Helfrich. We were fortunate enough to watch him every day. Couldn't really say maybe a whole lot of how the competition was going, other than the fact that he and Jeff Lockett for the bulk of camp were splitting reps, and both players I think had strengths and weaknesses, and those showed throughout. It didn't seem maybe the clear-cut difference to a layman like myself, but when you really look at the resume and the experience, the numbers, the highlights. It's hard to go against someone like a Vernon Adams, such a dynamic playmaker.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been surprised to see an or between their names on the first depth chart, if nothing else, just to kind of keep them guessing a little bit. But I think there's no doubt the potential for Vernon Adams in this offense is really, really high once he gets everything down. I think we were on the same page, and that from the day he showed up, it was like, whoa, this guy's pretty ready to go. There's not a lot of rust here. And then about 4 or 5 days in was the first scrimmage of camp. And about halfway through that scrimmage, I'm going, this isn't a competition at all. This is Vernon Adams' job, no doubt about it. He's the guy that's going to win this quarterback job. I couldn't really say that in practice reports and such, because I'm just sort of trying to objectively report what's going on. But that was my own 2 cents, is that, it's slam dunk, he's the guy. And then Jeff Lockett kind of finished that day really well. Vernon didn't quite finish as well that day. And I thought Jeff sort of rallied over the next few days and said, hey, I'm going to make a competition out of this no matter what. Whereas things, and Scott Frost alluded to this, things started to slow down a little bit for Vernon. They started to demand more of him in terms of not just making plays on his own, but actually executing the offense. And it started to even out a little bit more, and particularly sort of in the objectively quantifiable periods, like clutch periods that they'd both run. It's not like one had much better results than the other. So for you or I looking at it, was like, well, hey, it looks like they're both kind of getting it done about the same rate. But late in camp and then going into the second scrimmage, I did start to see a little bit of separation. I think you and I, kind of gun to our head, both would have thought at the end of that second scrimmage it would probably end up being Vernon. And so certainly was not a shocking development to see him name the guy.
When he came in that first day, clearly, the relief that he had out there in the practice field, getting through the final math test, getting his degree officially from Eastern Washington, and he was loose out there, and he's showing off that arm, and he's just dropping dimes all over the field, and you're just like, oh my goodness. And then, as you said, it sort of, it really did sort of tighten up a little bit, and a lot of that I think had to do with him having to digest so much information. And also, Mark Helfrich often stands behind the line, behind the offense during drills, and he's blowing plays dead left and right. If Vernon was taking too much time in the pocket or starting to scatter around a little bit. And he did, I thought about it the other day, he did that early in Marcus Mariota's career as well, where if in a game situation, a quarterback with that much athleticism probably is able to buy himself more time.
I think there was one time in one of the scrimmages where Vernon even kind of threw up his arms like, Coach.
I
could have got out of that.
But it's I think it's a good sort of training mechanism, and it's forcing him to be the Oregon quarterback and run the Oregon offense. And by the end of camp, I really think that we saw things were coming so much quicker to him. He was getting the line ready. He was getting plays off, and now out at practice, running with the ones, which probably helps things a little bit when you have a veteran center like Matt Hegarty snapping you the ball every time. But they're really able to get back to that Oregon tempo. And I think right before the depth chart was released, that's where it kind of clicked for me when I saw that he was able to organize and run the tempo that the Ducks, have kind of become famous for in college football, and really not miss a beat. And it is kind of remarkable. It really was only a couple weeks that he was here with the coaches and his teammates and able to kind of digest all that.
Kind of not to be overlooked in that is the addition of Hegarty, because he's by far Oregon's most consistent center right now. His presence on the field is so amazing, and it's been that way since the first day. Calling the O-line over to indicate where the ball is on the field, where between the hash marks, get them organized, get them set, get them going between plays. That's a big deal. So his presence is amazing, and then the consistency of his snaps is just remarkable. I mean, he's by far the most consistent center. Doug Brenner's up there as well, but Hegarty is the man. And so, one thing we heard from players early on was that, Vernon had a great deep ball, that Jeff got it out a little quicker. Well, I think what we're seeing now is, part of that is Vernon, when he was playing with the 2s and 3s, was dealing with some tricky snaps where it's hard to get it out quick when you're reaching down or up or off to the side to grab a snap. Now that he's working with Hegarty, the snap's there every time, and he can, find a guy and get rid of it. That's a big difference maker. I mean, Hegarty's impact on this offense isn't to be overlooked either.
Hegarty's a guy that you don't hear a whole lot of chatter about. Are there any other players that you can think of from camp that maybe have gotten overlooked a little bit in the media in terms of guys that really have to kind of perform for this team to have success this year?
Well, I think it's a cool story that Matt Pearson is running it with the ones at guard, and it's like no big deal. Now he's like an experienced scholarship player, where if a year or two ago you told Steve Greatwood this guy would be starting for you this season, he'd be going, what went wrong? And they had to deal with some things last year that Pearson was kind of thrust into it, but now he's just he's a rock. He's you can overlook him and it's no big deal, and that's really a cool story. Kirk Merritt is going to have a big influence on this offense soon. Probably this week in this opener he's going to play a big role already. He's a kind of another Royce Freeman. Combines being an incredibly dynamic athlete with a very serious, focused, no-nonsense approach to the game. And, you combine that, you've got somebody who's really going to have a big impact. And I do think it's gotten a lot of attention because of the defensive backfield losses, but Arion Springs' development, he's got that joyful swagger that you like to see out of a cornerback. And that helps him, and his work ethic in practice is so much better. His demeanor is so much better. I still think there's, probably over the next few weeks, this secondary is going to give up some plays as they all get on the same page and get comfortable. Let's not act like they're all experienced vets now just because we've been watching them in practice for 3 weeks. But I think that group should get up to speed relatively quickly, and that's been gratifying to see.
Yeah, you spend any time around Springs, and he's the type of player, if you're an Oregon fan or supporter, you want him to have success,
right?
Because you want that personality to be front and center, and for people to get to know him a little bit and see what he's all about. Because I would agree completely. He has fun out there. And all those guys, even though they're young, they have short memories, and you have to as a quarterback. Right. You get beat on one play, you come back and you win the next one. You get beat on the play, you still talk trash.
Right.
So it's been good to see, and that's going to really be as we get into the preview here for Eastern Washington, the season opener. That's going to be a storyline, because Eastern Washington is, they're one of the highest scoring teams in college football. They don't have Vernon Adams Jr. as their quarterback anymore, but the guy who stepped in for him last year, Jordan West, went 3-1 as a starter, and was able to keep that offense going. They've got their leading receiver back, Cooper Kupp, who is going into his junior year. He already has nearly 200 career catches. He had over 100 last year. And if you watch any of the highlights from the Eastern Washington game, you see him making plays all over the field. So this is a team that I think is, while they know they're playing up a level, they know they're coming to Autzen Stadium to play Oregon, but I fully expect Eastern Washington to be able to score points. Where the Ducks really, I think, have the advantage is they have a fine-tuned offense themselves, and they're going up against a defense that allowed some points last year, and they lost a ton of key starters from a year ago. They have a new defensive coordinator, so this could have the makings of kind of a high-scoring game for both of these teams.
Yeah, for all the experience Oregon brought back in its front seven, you're going against a new opponent for the first time, and one that Don Pelham said features a lot of looks. DP was saying that Eastern could on one series have a play with 6 linemen like Stanford likes to do, multiple tight ends, and then the next they'll just air it out. And the passing game, some guys have been comparing them to is Washington State, who airs it out as much as anybody in the country. So when you're able to change it up that much, that's really impressive because that's a lot to get your players to know. I mean, those are dramatically different concepts. So that's impressive. And Mark Helfrich mentioned this earlier this week too, that to some extent the first week is all about adjustments. You know what you want to do, but a football game isn't so much about you want to do as to what the opponent shows you and what you do based on that, and how you adjust to different looks that you see that you weren't necessarily anticipating, and how you adjust to game conditions. This wouldn't be the first time that Oregon went into a game in which the Ducks were favored, but the opponent scored first, and sort of how do you react to that situation if that were to be the case? So there is so many unknowns going into a first game regardless of the opponent, and this is an FCS opponent, but it's a highly accomplished one. I mean, it's a perennial playoff team at that level. And those are dangerous teams. Those are teams that are better than some lower level FBS teams. So it's going to be a good challenge for this Oregon team, and with Michigan State looming out there, you want to be challenged a little bit this game.
Yeah, well, regardless of the fact that they're an FCS level team, they have a senior offensive line. Their entire offensive line is seniors. The Oregon front seven, it seems a little odd to say this, they lose a first-round NFL draft pick in Eric Armstead, but from a depth standpoint, they may be a better and stronger, certainly a deeper unit this year.
Absolutely, yeah. When you got Henry Mondu and his development, Tuitalia really making strides, as you tend to see with a senior defensive lineman. Chris Solomona, if you remember from 10 years or so ago, is the same way. Really blossomed from his junior to his senior year as a JC transfer. And then Austin Malawata, another sophomore guy like Mondu, who looks like a rock as the backup nose guard to Balducci. Rex Manu, a true freshman who I think he could be a bubble guy. He could help this team if they need it. You'd like to redshirt him, but if you need it, he's a big body who's really active. It can take up space. TJ Daniel, so much depth. So you can lose Armstead. First of all, it helps to have DeForest Buckner back, who may end up being a better NFL prospect than Eric Armstead, but then the depth too. And then all seniors across the linebacking core too, and depth there from Taradni Prevo and Jimmy Swain and Johnny Reagan. But yet again, Danny Mattingly. But I think it's Phil Steele, who's a college football analyst who's put out his yearbook. He's a stat head as far as football goes. He puts an incredible amount of stock in offensive line experience. So when you're talking about an offensive line of all seniors that they're going against, you wouldn't expect that to be a walkover. I mean, that's going to be a challenge too for that group.
But it's a good challenge to have though, because it's a home game. You should have a size advantage a little bit just based on talent with the two levels of football, and then as you mentioned, going into Michigan State the next week. This front seven is, I think they seem to really have come together this year. You mentioned Rex Manu. He reminds me a little bit of Malawata last year. Comes in as a true freshman, and by the end of camp, you're like, whoa, this guy.
Right.
In a perfect world, you're able to redshirt him, but you might not. You might not want to after a couple games. So, big test for them. But it certainly is a veteran group, and I think they'll handle it. The secondary, as we touched on a little bit earlier, is going to have a lot more youth, and against a kind of a deep threat passing team, or at least points of their offense are in Eastern Washington, they're going to be tested right away, and they're going to have to rely on some young leaders like Tyree Robinson. Reggie Daniels is kind of the veteran now of that group, but you have Springs, Cisse, Ugo Amadi, who we haven't mentioned yet, who's a true freshman cornerback, and he's going to see, he's one of those guys like Kirk Merritt, true freshman that fans are going to see right off the bat.
Right, yeah. They're going to get tested. If I'm Eastern Washington, I take some shots at this secondary, and they're probably going to give up a play or two. I wouldn't be shocked to see, uncharacteristically for this defense over the last few years, they haven't given up a lot of explosion plays, but I wouldn't be shocked to see a 40, 50-yard touchdown because Eastern Washington decides, hey, that's the group we got to attack. And they are some young guys who are going to have to get on the same page. But again, in terms of growing pains, let's see some this week and try to get them out of the way, because if I'm Michigan State, I'm doing the same thing. I got a cornerback in Connor Cook who's played a lot of football, and I see the depth chart and the youth in that secondary. I'm going to take some shots at them too.
Well, you got the new quarterback on offense, Vernon Adams Jr., taking over for Marcus Mariota. You've heard lots of people, probably us included, during the offseason talk about how the new guy Doesn't have to be Marcus. There's so much talent around him. And really, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And I wouldn't necessarily accuse the Oregon offense of this, but when you do have a player like a Marcus Mariota and you've seen him bail you out of situations a few different times, maybe you're not locked in every single second like you should be. Now, this is a situation you don't have Marcus. There were games, Scott Frost talked about it during the preseason last year. One of the things that really took Oregon to the next level is they did have to rely on Marcus, 3 or 4 games to kind of save their bacon, and he was able to do so. So it's going to take a much bigger team effort this year. It's probably going to take a healthier squad than the Ducks had last year, certainly along the offensive line where they were just decimated and had what seemed like a different lineup every single game in what ended up being a college football playoff run. But I'm really curious to see, if this unit, because they don't have, the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, if maybe they're locked in even a little bit more. We know they have the playmakers, Byron Marshall, Braylon Addison's back. Merritt, we've got to see, and he's going to be an exciting player that fans are really going to like. Everybody knows what you get in Royce Freeman, and I think that there's more that he can bring, and I think he's just at the tip of the iceberg for his potential. But then you've got Taj Griffin and Tony Brooks-James and Kenai Benoit, who like Tuitalia on the other side of the ball, has kind of reinvented himself and has just made such a huge leap from one year to the next that it's, offensively, regardless of the opponent, if you're an Oregon fan, you're going to want to watch this game and see what this particular team brings to the table.
I think your point about Royce, I'd want to second that he, again, he's somebody you almost take for granted now, because what you're thinking about right now is the unknowns and the question marks, and he's not that. But I think he's really motivated to improve on last year. And show that he can do even more. Again, as we said in comparing Merritt to him, he's a really focused guy. He's all about business. He's not going to get caught up in any of this awards hype that he's got, that he received in the preseason. He wants to help this team win, and he wants to be even a better Royce Freeman this year than he was last year. And so if you're looking for kind of an X factor to help make up for the absence of Mariota, I think Royce is more than willing to take that on and try to have an even bigger impact on this offense.
I've mentioned it on Mac and Mose in the past, but my favorite Royce Freeman quote came last year after a Ducks defeat, and he said, "I hate losing more than I like to win."
Right.
And that's the type of guy you want on your side for sure, especially when he's about 230 pounds of solid muscle. Great game coming up. Oregon, Eastern Washington. We will recap it on the next episode of Mac and Mose, and then next week we'll also preview Oregon's big game, top 10, maybe even a top 5 matchup at that point between the Ducks and Michigan State. Until then, if you have questions for us, feel free to hit us up on Twitter. I am at McNamara UO. He is at Duck Football. Until next time, we'll see you.
Gets the corner into the end zone for the touchdown. It's through 50. He's got the speed. Touchdown.